The classical era from 1750 to 1800. A classic is something that endures. The music of what we now call the classical era was the first to thrive without interruption long after its time. Joseph Haydn and Mozart, the two leading composers of this era, wrote music that has never really gone out of fashion. The term classical also refers to Greek and Roman antiquity, which strongly influenced the arts and architecture of this period. As a new kind of thinking took hold, the Baroque love of ornamentation, virtuosity, and expressive extremes gave way to more classical ideas of balance, clarity, and naturalness. The 18th century as a whole put, particularly the period between about 1720 and 1790, is known as the Age of Enlightenment. Thought held that reason could bring humankind to a new age of splendor, freed from the dark superstitions of the past. Science became more important during the Enlightenment. For Enlightenment artists and thinkers, the power to convince lay not in overwhelming displays of opulence or in larger-than-life drama aimed to influence the emotions, but rather in critical thinking and reasoned discussion, which persuaded the mind. The music of the classical era reflects these principles of clarity, proportion, and what critics of the day called naturalness. Classical era melodies are on the whole more tuneful, less complicated, more balanced than those of the Baroque era. More symmetrical melodic phrasing based on the rhythms of dance music extended itself across all genres, both vocal and instrumental. Critics of the day praised homophonic texture for its clarity and grace, and the dense textures of counterpoint became the exception rather than the rule. But this does not mean that the music of the classical era is somehow simpler, for a typical movement of music from this period features more internal contrast than its Baroque counterpart. A movement in sonata form, the most important new structural innovation of the classical era, one used in Mozart's Symphony No. 40 in G minor, and you'll see more about that in chapter 25, juxtaposes multiple themes that differ markedly in their melody, rhythm, harmony, dynamics, and timbre. Music as the language of the heart. The string quartet, a work for two violins, viola, and cello, was another innovation of the classical era, and it is no coincidence that critics of the time spoke of works like Joseph Haydn's String Quartet in C major, Opus 76, number 3, and you can check more about that in chapter 22. It was as a rational conversation among four intelligent individuals. In the second movement, each of the instruments presents the theme in succession, while the other three weave an ever-changing commentary around that theme. The melody itself, like many classical melodies, consists of an opening and closing phrase. Writers of the Enlightenment recognized the structural parallels with language and began to call instrumental music the language of the heart. Instrumental music lacked the specificity of words, or it was the language of the mind. But the perception of it as a language of any kind helped raise the prestige of such genres as the string quartet, the symphony, and the concerto. Music and revolution. The plot of Mozart's comic opera, The Marriage of Figaro, would have been unthinkable only a generation before. Count Almaviva, a nobleman, is outwitted by his servants. This opera captures the growing mood of discontent with the established order of society in the decades leading up to the French Revolution. Basic ideas about human rights, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to quote the U.S. Declaration of Independence, won growing acceptance during this time. Enlightenment social critics such as Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued for the innate goodness of human beings and for the rational pursuit of personal and societal betterment. The Declaration of Independence is a quintessential document of the Enlightenment, for it recognizes the inherent dignity of the individual. Its principal author, Thomas Jefferson, established the University of Virginia on the premise that the institution would be based on the illimitable freedom of the human mind. For here we are not afraid to follow truth where it may lead, nor to tolerate any error so long as reason is left free to combat it. The American Revolution from 1775 to 1781 established the independence of the United States from Great Britain, and the French Revolution in 1789 overthrew the power of what until that point had been the world's most powerful monarchy. The results affected not just the countries immediately involved, but ultimately every nation in the Western world. National independence and democracy, if not always realized in practice, became new ideals of social order. Music could help foster these ideals through such songs as the stirring La Marseillaise in France and Chester in the United States, which became the unofficial anthem of the American Revolution. Music and the new economy. The second half of the 18th century witnessed the beginnings of an even more powerful revolution, on one that could change everyday life throughout the Western world. Rapid advances in technology, the steam engine, the cotton gin, and the principle of manufacturing based on interchangeable parts, to cite just a few examples, made it possible to produce goods on a far greater scale than ever before. Many national and local economies based on agriculture began to shift toward industry. Cities grew rapidly, and this growth in urban population in turn created new demands for the cultural institutions of all kinds, including music. While the churches and royal courts remained important centers of culture, theaters and concert halls open to the paying public began to flourish for the first time on a widespread scale. We see these changes in the careers of both Haydn and Mozart. Haydn worked almost all his adult life in the service of one aristocratic family, composing symphonies, sonatas, and operas according to the desires of his employers. By the 1790s, however, Haydn was lured away to England to write symphonies, including the Symphony No. 102 in B-flat major, for a series of public concerts organized by a musical entrepreneur. Mozart left his native Salzburg at the age of 25 to seek his fortune in Vienna. He tried unsuccessfully to land a secure job at the imperial court there, but he managed to support himself reasonably well for at least a time by giving public concerts, by writing operas, and by composing works that could be published and sold to music-loving amateurs. Composers had to write in ways that would appeal to this expanded audience, even while maintaining the high standards of their craft. Works like the Piano Concerto in A major were the perfect lure for audiences intrigued by Mozart's virtuosity, both as a composer and a performer. The art of the natural. Throughout the classical era, artists in every field looked to nature as a model. The ideal work of art, according to this view, was one that hid its artifice, that concealed its mechanical elements, and that appeared to be the product of effortless, natural genius. Composers still had to learn technique and to study such topics as harmony and counterpoint with great diligence. The goal of all this study was not to show off one's art, but rather to touch the hearts of listeners in a manner that was direct and spontaneously, or at least seemingly spontaneous. This new aesthetic manifested itself in music in many ways. Melodies and ornamentation became less ornate. Textures on the whole tended more toward homophony than polyphony. Homophony being the more natural of the two textures because it allowed the ear to focus on a single melody. In opera, plots and characters became more realistic. Mozart and others devoted great energies to the new genre of opera buffa, or comic opera, which portrayed real-life characters and situations as opposed to the mythological and historical figures that populate so much of Baroque opera. In Mozart's The Marriage of Figaro, we can immediately identify with the emotions and actions of the characters because they are presented in a manner that is true to life. In a word, natural. Now please continue on through the rest of your reading for this week, and know that there is a quiz on Canvas at the end of this week. You can take it any time, but make sure you continue to follow through the modules. Thank you. You guys are doing awesome.